But it was a wall on both sides.
Good evening, council and staff. May I have a mover and seconder to call the special meeting to order, please? I have Councillor Moore and Councillor Thompson that the special meeting of the Council of Township of Springwater, February 19th, 2025 come to order at 5:30 p.m. All those in favor? And that has carried. Councillor, any disclosures of pecuniary interest? And not seeing any, I will now call upon our Director Culver and Sierra Planning.
Management led by is renowned consulting firm. Integrating through community engagement and a detailed review of the existing 2016 master plan, which itself was a revision of the 2005 plan. A master plan can serve as a blueprint for municipal operations by outlining long-term visions and strategic directions to manage progress, growth, and investments within a structured understanding of community needs and wants. Such a plan provides a lens through which staff and council can communicate regarding annual service objectives and any scaling requirements to meet those objectives. The plan can also act as an ongoing guide for staff recommendations and council decision-making by providing a transparent and readily available navigational map to be referenced throughout any given year and within the scope of the plan. John is here to provide you with a summary of the update, after which we will be pleased to answer any immediate questions you might have. At the next regularly scheduled meeting with council, you'll have the opportunity to adopt this plan update should you wish to. Between now and then, staff encourage you to reach out with any further questions or concerns you might have as you digest the contents of the update. We'll do our best to seek the appropriate answers to help with your decision making. So I ask that you please welcome Jonathan Hack from Sierra Planning and Management.
Thanks, Dean. Madam Mayor, members of council, it's very nice to be here, and so I am going to launch into it. Changing the screen. Does anyone do that for me?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, there we go. Thanks. So I'll just nod. So we have a still a fairly dense presentation, but as you can see from my desk copy, the plan is fairly substantial. In fact, it's very substantial, and it's the product of several years of work, and so it's certainly not rushed. It's been considered, and it's been reconsidered in the context of projects that have been ongoing in the township. So it's in our view, it's a strong document, strong foundation. So we'll go through the foundation of the plan, the overview, the goals, and then we'll dive straight into the key recommendations. I'm happy to take any questions you have. And we've broken it down, and what we try and do in all of these plans is it could be any number of very significant recommendations, and there's small housekeeping ones, and it's sort of a huge amount of potential to-dos for Dean and colleagues to address. So what we try and do is structure it based on sort of principles, goals, objectives, and then an umbrella of recommendations based on reasonable themes that we establish in a plan. And that should hold the thing together as you go through over the next few years. Just before I get into this, I just want to make it clear that as a master plan, people call them strategies, master plans, guidance documents. What this is just as you would have a document for any of the other major services that you provide, whether it be transportation, wastewater, it doesn't really matter, libraries. The idea is that there is a way of looking into the crystal ball, peeking over the horizon, however you wish to look at it, and establish what would be the appropriate level of action that you take on both a capital, on a human resource basis, as well as a sort of operational basis to ensure that the level of service, what you provide, is maintained as the community changes. And so that's the emphasis of all of this. What it is not, excuse me, is a blueprint. It's not a thou shalt document. It's designed to be brought forward every year as you contemplate the budget process. And we know that things are going to change. And so the document has a level of flexibility to it as well. If we go through to the next slide. Thanks. So the scope, it's always important to consider the scope because, there's any number of things which touch on the mandate that you have for recreation and also the mandate for that other organizations have for recreation that you don't have control over, whether that be a school board or a partner municipality or private providers, not-for-profit providers. So in terms of the scope, it really focuses on that which you own and control. So indoor facilities, so in this case, it's the arena and the community centers. And we're also looking forward in terms of any additional infrastructure that you'd have in terms of indoor facilities. Parks and open space. This really is the glue of most plans because you have relatively few indoor facilities and you have a lot of the other stuff, the parks and open space. So the active and passive parkland and the open space and the connections that you have, the stuff that sort of makes Springwater the place that it is to live in and enjoy. So it's really part of the competitive advantage of the township. And so this is where recreation, in my view, recreation touches on economic development, touches on maintaining a quality of life. And so I always view these documents as alongside your industrial strategy. It's two sides of the same coin. It's about quality of life. It's about retention of people, attraction of people as well. So it's all part and parcel of that. The outdoor facilities, I guess, is where the action starts in terms of getting, those that you partner with to deliver programs, meaning the user groups, sports fields, in general, diamonds, multi-use courts, playgrounds, fitness equipment, so on and so forth, as well as your launch points. And you can throw into there the various kinds of new facilities that are required as the population in the region starts to change as well. And then programming and service delivery. So how does the township, as the communities that make up it evolve and the range of asks that you're provided, how do you sort of continue to do what you do in a historic sense, but then transition into creating opportunities to direct the programs that the community needs, to have a greater say in what happens in on the parks and in the buildings. Next slide, please. So this is probably one of the most important slides that we have to show, and it's because any master plan that we are going to be asking you to consider for taking on board as policy is, it shouldn't be a consultant's view of the world. It should be a combination of our work, that of staff, the input from the community, best practices, whatever you think is necessary to bring these plans together. So central to it is the idea that it speaks to what the community has told us. There's always a little bit of confusion around how much consultation is required to speak, for and on behalf of the population. So what we try and do is make sure we have as many touch points as possible, but it is not required that you have 1,000 responses to a survey. It's not required. It's not required if you're taking the pulse of the nation for election intentions. It's the same here. It's not required. What you want to get is a representative sample. So we've done it through in-person meetings, obviously quite a few virtual meetings, and then online engagement as well. So just to go through it, I do want to go through it because it is important. Internal meetings. So again, part of the backbone of any of these kinds of plans is that we try and fully understand the organizational makeup, the challenges in particular of making all of this come together on a daily, weekly, and seasonal basis, so that we don't get immediately offside in coming in with recommendations, which is just impossible to implement because either the resources aren't there or we've just misread the working practices, whether you subconsult grass cutting or do it in-house. These kinds of things are fundamental to our understanding. So we have all of that laid out. And of course, we went through and discussed not only with mayor and council before, but in terms of the operators, those in the parks operations service, right down to, and obviously planning as well, growth management, looking at getting their advice as experts on this. External consultation, very important that we spoke to a number of the other public organizations that are relevant to everyone's experience of living here and recreating here. So that's the conservation authorities, also the school boards, and as you can see there, anything from Ontario Parks to the health unit. Probably most important, the user groups and service club engagement. So notoriously difficult to get everyone to respond. And of course, the usual sort of refrain, and I say it just tongue in cheek, is we try our best to get outreach to people. And then when we do that, there's always someone that says, I didn't know about it. So we had several meetings, but we also had a good outreach online. We contacted 63 groups, which is a good number of groups, and we got about over 50% responded, 34 groups, and community recreation associations, and we had individual meetings with them. And then the online public opinion survey, in addition to an in-person workshop, that was 600 engaged. So 600 is a big number for a community of this size. If we had an issue-specific thing, say we were contemplating, and I know you've got the community hub, that's a project, and that may have had, I think, 800 responses when you were going through the process there. To get 600 on something as generic as a master plan, I think is something to have some confidence in as you go forward. It speaks to what people's interests are. Next slide. So what do we hear from people? It's important to drill down on these kinds of numbers because statistics can have a tendency not to tell the whole truth on these things. So we did ask a question about top priorities, and we tend to leave that as an open-ended question because we try not to bias people. We don't give them a shopping list of things. And just to give you an indication there on the indoor facilities, you have a lot of people saying arenas. So what do we mean by that? Is it a new arena or not? So we've done an independent assessment, which I think confirms what your intentions are as it relates to the new community hub. But in terms of what people's priorities were here, as we say in the notations here, the responses, a lot of people were talking about essentially conserve, protect, enhance the Elm Vale Arena, which speaks to, the significant interest in maintaining that facility going forward. Indoor aquatics is the one that stands out for me, not surprising. Wouldn't surprise me if you had people advocating for a 50-meter pool as well. And in the midst of that, you tend to get people that will do that, and they do it out of best interests for their users. But just to speak to it generically, indoor aquatics is important. And gymnasium as well. Interesting that is not really a top priority. It's secondary. But when you come to consider how you build new facilities and create efficiencies, these uses are good bedfellows. In terms of outdoor recreation facilities, it's a little bit more mixed. And the emphasis there on pickleball, for example, and ball diamonds. These are things which compared to indoor facilities, they're easier to plan for, easier to implement. But nothing there which gives us any surprises. Next slide. Thanks. Just very quickly on this, there are a number of planned drivers in order to make sure that it fits, particularly with the issues in Springwater. And the ones I would just focus on are the changing population and growth dynamics. It's obviously, it's Southern Ontario, it's the GTA, it's Barrie's significant growth, which has slowed a little bit as they've had some servicing constraints. But for a while there, Barrie was really one of the top growing municipalities in the country. Similarly, Springwater has started to really see the effects of that growth. So you've got to plan for it. And essentially, that's why I say these kinds of documents should be viewed not only as taking care of what you have, but making sure you get what you need to done correctly. And we know it's going to cost money. So these documents are particularly important to help you get the funding that you need. The other one, I'm just going to point out one other, which is effective asset management. So you do have a lot of assets already, and an emphasis on this plan is to make sure that you maintain and use and program those assets as effectively as you can, because it's extremely expensive to build new. Next slide. Won't focus on this, other they can be read at your leisure, but some of the key goals, I think, again, is we have to recognize that Springwater is not an island. It is part of an operating region. It's part of that is within the orbit of Barry in terms of the demand that can come this way. So if you build a facility, you can expect people from Barry to use it, and vice versa, just as people from Midhurst and elsewhere will go into Barry. So a regional lens, not that we're not talking cost sharing, but we're talking a recognition that you don't have to build everything, because what happens in Barry and elsewhere is just as relevant. So it's about just as this plan is implemented, and it takes time to get anything built. We recognize that. Is recognize that this plan, the context of it will change. If Barry were to move on the two southerly multi-use recreation complex, which is sort of generally on the books, that's going to be significant. And if there was other development in Wasaga and Collingwood, anywhere within the orbit, that's going to be relevant as well. So the regional context is going to change, and I think that's up to Dean and colleagues every year to sort of monitor that for council, so that you place this in its proper context. And then the one I just want to sort of emphasize then is the last one: plan for a unified township based on a series of communities. So what we've tried to do in this plan is recognize that each community is distant from one another. They each have a history. They each have community centers and outdoor playing fields that are relevant. They speak to the history that we want to maintain, but we also have to recognize that it is one municipality, and how we're going to provide the level of service that meets everyone's needs. So next slide. And there is just an example of, and again, I don't need to dwell on this, other than to say, with such a large geographic area that you have, we landed pretty quickly on the idea that you will need 2 service hubs. So what does that really mean? It means that you're maintaining a significant presence in terms of indoor facilities, that arena in Elmvale. Now, at some point, there may be some decisions that are made that have to be made about the future of those buildings, but it's not within the life of this plan. And then Midhurst area as the other hub. And so this is where I think this plan feeds into other projects, such as the community hub that you're addressing at this point. And then the other communities become secondary hubs, a mix of outdoor and indoor opportunities. So we're making sure that those services are maintained in those centers. So we're not really looking at the plan from the point of view of a lot of disposition. And there are some things that we identified where you have a lot of things, but it's important that this sort of structure is maintained. Next slide. So the model, so just on the left, so currently, the model is one really where currently, the user groups do a lot of programming in the facilities that you have. The community rec associations are there. You have some level of programming. The municipality is very active in terms of working with developers to make sure that the parklands get developed in the subdivisions. But as growth continues, there's going to need to be a response on the staffing side. And I mean, particularly on the outside, on the outdoor facility side, the tendency, at least I've seen in municipalities that we work in, is that there is a general sense that, you can spread the resources more thinly. And that's not a pejorative comment on municipal management. It's just a reality. You add another park in a subdivision, you've got existing staff. You seasonal staff, you make it work. Whereas with the community hub, The community. Say it again. With the community hub, um, when you build that facility, I'll just wait. That's okay. With the community hub, when that is built, I say when, so when it is built, you are going to be essentially the recreation department is essentially going to be, in that building. And I say this not to get overly detailed, but to say that when you have that level of build and you have an aquatics facility in there, for example, you are going to be the programmer unless you bring in and partner with a YMCA or some other organization. So the one way or the other through the life of this plan, the recreation, Parks and Recreation Department function operationally within the township is going to take on a different form. And that is part of a natural evolution. And our message here is that it's a good thing because you can now direct the programming for it. When it comes time to do the business planning for the community hub, that's when you start to think about what it means in terms of implications for tax base contributions. Next slide. So key recommendations, just to go through, and I'll try to be as fast as I can on this. The community arena, so maintain the ice in Elmvale and plan for, we've got 1 to 2 pads in the south. We are purposefully agnostic about, whether it's 1 or 2. We've run the numbers. You can see what's appropriate, but it will come down to a whole discussion about what can be afforded, whether you go through a sort of an exercise where you have a modular build, where you're building one and you have the space and the ice plant set up for the second one when you feel you can. Or if you were flush with funds for whatever reason that that was provided, then you may choose to go with the benefit of building now rather than the expense of building later. So there's a flexibility we want to have there. Indoor aquatics, obviously continue to plan for an aquatic center at the community hub. It would be a very exciting project. It's not going to be a regional pool. It's not going to be a 10 lane by 25 meter. May not even be an 8 lane. Again, it's all a case of when you get down to detailed design and concept and cost. But something like a 6 lane, 25 meter pool is a good community sized pool. Multi-tank, so it wouldn't just be one tank, it would be several in the same building. Community centers and halls, continue to maintain the community centers for continued use, but work with community groups and local partners to expand the opportunities for those which are underutilized. So we want to be realistic. We don't want to have a plan where the council would struggle to take on board because, say, we were putting in a recommendation for decommissioning. But I would just itemize that, these facilities they are assets, and they need to perform a certain function, and the township should be controlling that, and should expect a level of utilization which is justifiable. Or in later iterations of the plan, you would start to look in different directions. Next slide. Thanks. Parkland supply hierarchy. So you have a very good, if it's just back up, we look at this not only from the level of how much land you have relative to the population, because obviously you're doing a lot better than the city of Toronto, for example, but you have a lot more open space. But we look at it in terms of the distribution and whether there is a hierarchy of neighborhood spaces that everyone should have ready access to, versus community spaces versus those that represent some level of sort of distribution, of destination park, the way you would park some of the most significant facilities that you would have if you were going to build them, new ball diamonds, things like that. So we have a classification there: community park, neighborhood park, parkettes, trailheads, total, and a total there. So 5.8 hectares per 1,000. That's a very good standard. Now, obviously, we're not going to say you need to reduce it, meaning sell off land, right? But going forward, you have the luxury of being able to, with this distribution, take a bit of a breath and just, pursue a standard which is not quite as robust. So if you just go to the next slide. So, we've got there encourage a parkland provision rate of 3 hectares per 1,000 new residents. So that's for going forward. And that's more in line with what you would see in an urbanizing community. So it just takes a little bit of the pressure off the parkland acquisition issues. And as you know, through provincial changes, the municipalities have been put on the defensive a little bit relative to the development community in terms of how and where and what kind of parkland you can establish. Nothing dramatic, but I think that's appropriate that we go down there. We think then, that's just the beginning. I think there needs to be parks and open space design standards, and that's not to say that the township hasn't done a good job so far. But again, getting more control over what it is that you want to see, where it goes, and the design is important. Looking at a hierarchy, so places parks that work well for larger groups of residents, community parks within each of the service centers as major destinations, and to consider rationalizing the amenities at the very least provided in some of the underutilized neighborhood parks that you have. And you obviously have to be careful about that. But it is a process that's going to take some staff resources to work out what is it can you reasonably do to reduce or rationalize amenities that are clearly not being used. And you have a separate trails master plan that was done by another group working with staff. This plan should align with that. Next slide. Okay. So on to the ball diamonds and fields. This is good. This is exciting stuff. So develop hubs for ball diamonds and rectangular field sports in the north. Consider an artificial turf facility to enable year-round play. How that gets used year-round is really up to you. But the idea is that using the advantages of building with a purpose in mind so that you could dome it, so you put the infrastructure in to make that happen, can really be a benefit to residents. They really can see that, they can continue to play soccer indoors in the winter without having to travel to other communities. That's just one example of the sports that you can use in these facilities. A range of improvements to the existing diamonds. I think that's really important, is to make sure that you don't lose sight that you have other assets. They need to be helped. We do seem to have a bit of a changing climate in the summer in terms of some of the level of heat and thunderstorms and this sort of stuff. So improving or looking at it through the lens of, is there anything we can do to improve seating or shade or structures like that, would be small wins that I think would be just good practice otherwise, and to improve capacity overall. In terms of the needs, a couple of new ball diamonds, and these are not cheap. If you do it properly and make them sort of tournament level, able to accommodate the smallest children right up to seniors, they are expensive. I won't shock you with the price of them, but it is something that for us to put out there 1 to 2 new ball diamonds is going to there's going to be a requirement to do some site analysis and work out exactly what that cost is, and then 4 new rectangular fields as well. Again, the more you can do in a hub, the better it's going to be. Next slide. We use the term build out, meaning essentially when the current sort of levels of urban development that have been identified as sustainable are reached. So some way out, probably beyond the date of this particular plan, there are additional. We're talking about additional pickleball courts. Just a word on pickleball is it's been so rapid, the increase in the demand for outdoor pickleball and then indoor pickleball, that you know, you kind of it threatens the sort of the process that by which you follow and say, well, here's your standard. You need this many per 1,000 people, because pickleball enthusiasts are exactly that. They recognize the quality of the sport. It's a great sport actually for all ages, but you still got to try and build according to a proper pattern of utilization. So we're moving away from the idea that you have this many thousand people, so you need this many courts. What we're saying is, how are you using the courts? You know, are you using them from 9 to 11 in the morning on a weekday, and then they're sort of vacant for the rest of the day when it's hot? Or are you using them effectively in a winterized venue during the prime time period, so that the children can come in after school and use it? That's the approach, because you want to accommodate these opportunities, but you can't keep building. That's really what we found. You can't keep building. You've got to have some standards to reflect upon. Next slide. Yeah, the approach to playgrounds, and this is standard in many places, and it may well be kind of the approach that you take now, but to really have a replacement strategy that every year there's going to be some level of replacement. So small, relatively small dollar amounts, plus the ability to consult with the community, because communities change. People get older, children leave home, and suddenly what was a family neighborhood can be one where it's got more empty nesters in it. So you have to ask, as you replace park playground amenities, you know, who's going to be using those facilities. So that sort of links into the, not necessarily the decommissioning side of things, but just making sure you get value for money in what you're putting in. Certainly a standard 400 to 800 meters in terms of walkability. And as we indicate there, a splash pad in the south, probably part of the community hub. Almost at the end. So just to go to the next slide, if you could. Then we have a range of additional facilities that we've identified based on some population standards. So new basketball courts. Again, the community hub, as it gets developed, if it is developed in the location that has been sort of talked about, it's a fairly large, obviously a large land holding. So the idea of master planning right from the outset, that you know where the outdoor facilities are going to go and what kind, whether or not you build them as part of this or later on. New skateboard park. We can talk about ice rink policy separately, but again, the experience is one where you've got to get the right balance in terms of who does what for outdoor ice rinks, and various comfort amenities. And then emerging facilities we've laid out there. You know, there are a lot of things that are new and emerging, whether it be disc golf, ultimate, just a desire to have general gathering areas as people want to take advantage of parks, people that may be coming from outside of the township as well. So there's going to be some questions which you'll look to the master plan to see whether there's any advice on it. You know, new sports, the obvious one that's sort of, I think, capturing the attention in Southern Ontario is cricket, where you've got large cricket, people coming from cricket playing nations, and they're being served with facilities in places like Brampton and further down in York region and Toronto. The question is, you know, does Springwater need to do that, or is that going to be taken care of elsewhere in Barrie, for example, or elsewhere? So we're not being too prescriptive on it, other than you know, the population is diversifying, and there's going to be a need to reflect upon that. Next one. So how do we do all of this? Well, we don't panic. I think it's very important that the plan, you know, if there are landmines, traps in this plan, I think we need to identify them and sort them out, remove them, whatever it might be, because what we do want at the end of the day is to have a plan that council feels comfortable in adopting as the program for the next 5 to 10 years. And so that means that gives the senior management of the township the ability to set up essentially what would have to be an interdepartmental working group, because there are lots of different responsibilities based on the particular responsibilities that each department has to make this plan work. It's not an ability for one member of senior management team to make this happen. So it has to be a document that's kept within easy reach. And I think it needs to be implemented on a basis that where the senior management team is able to come back to staff every year and give certainly a report on the progress. And it may be slow to begin with, and it may pick up speed as you get into subsequent years, as there's quite a bit of plan making that's required in order to get things off the ground. As you can see with the community hub as an example, there's a myriad of steps before you actually complete the project. Next slide. Just for everyone's benefit. So I think that the immediate next item is for council review. I'm obviously here to take any questions, but we can also have questions at a later date if that's appropriate as well. And then certainly the adoption of the master plan is important. A plan that council can get behind that is adopted becomes the guidance document that gives clarity to the process. We have had a couple of plans over the years where a council, because of a thorny issue, decided to receive for information, and frankly, it doesn't help because then you're debating it for as long as it's in existence. So having a plan that everyone can adopt as guidance means that certainly the capital budgeting process is certainly cleaner than it otherwise is. So I'll leave it at that, Dean, if there's anything else.
Thank you for the presentation. And at this time, I'll just have council, we will just have the motion read and then we can ask any questions. So mover and seconder for this, please. I have Councillor Garwood and Councillor Fisher, that the presentation from Sierra Planning and Management regarding the Recreation Master Plan update be received. And I will turn to members of council for any comments or questions at this time. Councillor Garwood.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin, and thank you for the presentation this evening. I found it really interesting going through. It's obviously a lot of information to read, a lot of data, a lot of numbers, but from my perspective, and more of a comment than a question at this time, and I've only quickly scanned it, so I haven't given it a full review, but I believe from what I've seen and from the perspective of the Elmvale community, and that's the lens that I'm putting over this when I read it, it's a true reflection of what I hear out in the community from folks. You know, just picking out a few items, the historical significance and a continued investment and preservation of the Elmvale Arena, of course, is a staple for our municipality, and it's an important historical feature of our community as well. So anyway, I wanted to thank you specifically. I do think that this is going to be a great guide for this council and future councils and staff as well moving forward. And I appreciate the effort that's been put into it. And I'm sure you'll hear from me with some questions.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Actually, just like Councillor Garwood, more of a comment than a question. Two things I heard you touch on, which I think are pretty pertinent for the council going forward. One, looking at a modular build as we grow. I think that was something that I've always looked to the hub. Maybe it's something that we start building, but we look at it from a modular perspective. It's something to be cognizant about going to the future. Also, assets performing certain functions. I think as we build, right, we will have community halls, other areas that may not be fulfilling their original functions, you know, and as you said, they are assets, and you're absolutely right. So we do have to think about that as we're growing. We're almost displacing sometimes those assets, but so we have to be cognizant of that so we don't end up with things that are inefficient, right, as we're building up efficiencies. So I just thought those were two really good points that were made throughout it. So thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. So I just thank you for the presentation. It's great information. There's a lot to dive into there. So I appreciate the work and the community engagement that's gone on with this. I do have a question for Director Culver. When we had spoke a couple months ago, I understand like it's a two-part project, or it's in tandem, if you will, the Trails Master Plan as well as the Parks and Rec Master Plan. But at one time when we had spoke, the thought had been that we would want to have the presentation of both of them together because a lot of the goals would align. So I'm just wondering where we are kind of on that process, if we're going to be expected to adopt one prior to the other.
Director Culver?
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. So that's a great question, and thank you, Councilor Alexander, for bringing it up. So at the next council meeting on March 5th, there'll be an opportunity to adopt the this master plan update. We'll also be bringing forward a report on the Trails Master Plan. Just I guess a preliminary or a preview of what that report will contain is that we'll be asking council to adopt or recommending that the council adopts the Trails Master Plan in principle on the basis that one of the challenges of aligning this plan with that plan is that plan scope involved a number of properties that we don't actually own. We don't have ownership of. There's a perception of the Springwater trail system that, we have this massive trail system, but in fact, a lot of it is owned by other parties. So as we go about looking through the recommendations identified by the plan, we need to be conscious of the fact that we're limited in terms of what we can actually affect. Having said that, adoption in principle also allows us to move forward on another initiative the staff have already begun to undertake, which is starting to develop a bit of a working group of property owners. So this would be groups like NVCA, the MNRF, Simcoe County, many of whom have already responded favorably to the idea of a collective approach to the trails network throughout Springwater. So while it's not as easy for us to adopt the Trails Master Plan at this time, the principles still hold, and it allows us to shoot towards something as we build this collective approach. And so anyway, a lot of this will be explained in the report that'll be coming to council on March 5th with the final draft of the Trails Master Plan for your in our recommendation adoption in principle.
And not seeing anything further, council has been encouraged to reach out between now and then and have any additional questions or concerns addressed. So thank you very much for the presentation. So council, we have read the motion. It's been moved in second that the presentation from Sierra Planning and Management regarding the Parks and Recreation Master Plan update be received. All those in favor? And that has carried. And may I have a mover and seconder for the confirmation bylaw, please? Councillor Garwood and Councillor Moore, that bylaw 2025-019 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the special meeting held on February 19th, 2025, listed here and be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? And that has carried. And a mover and seconder for adjournment, please. I have Deputy Cabral and Councillor Alexander. I apologize. I'm not used to the hand, so I'm going to have you second that so that the special meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 6:16 p.m. to meet again a regular meeting on February 19th, 2025 at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? And that has carried. Thank you.